Hey everybody, this is Josh with a Dram Good Drink. It's good to be back after far too much time away. As you probably noticed if you follow me on Instagram, and certainly if you follow my YouTube, I've been pretty quiet lately. It's not because I don't want to be tasting and reviewing whiskeys, much to the contrary actually. This summer actually my parents moving into a new home, and I have been hard at work helping them move, boxing things, moving things, unboxing things, and this week they are finally settled into their new place, which is awesome. I'm really happy for them. Really glad to have some space back to myself as well, and far fewer boxes around here. So now that I finally have some time to sit down on my couch in my tasting room here and enjoy some whiskeys, I am coming back with a review of two spirits from St. George Spirits. St. George, for those of you who aren't aware, is a California-based craft distiller. St. George Spirits actually is one of the oldest craft distilleries in the country, celebrating their 40th anniversary this year, in fact. They started way back in 1982. So, I don't know, if you're like me, I think about sort of the craft distillation boom over the last several years. It's like every town now seems like it has one or more distilleries of, varying, say, production quality, varying types of spirits they're producing. Some are sourcing spirits, some are distilling their own, some are doing whiskeys, some vodkas, some brandies, all sorts of stuff. Oh, there's a cat. Hi, Pumpkin. So I think about wow, there's a lot of craft distillers out there now. That wasn't always the case, and in fact, even a few years ago, wasn't the case. And St. George has been around blazing trails and coming up with really, really unique, well-crafted spirits for decades. Like I said, one of the earliest names in the game, back in an era when most distillation in the United States was produced by, some of the big brands out there. But I'm not here to talk about the big brands or other, local mom and pop craft distillers. I'm here to talk about a couple of whiskeys from St. George Spirits. These were, by the way, generously provided to me by St. George. So thank you, St. George Spirits, for providing these. Also, thank you for your patience. They've been sitting on my shelf waiting to be tasted for several months now. I just stopped and thought about that. Yeah, it's been a while. Like I said, I've been busy. Been really waiting to try these. They are, as you'll see, still sealed, still full. I have not tasted these, so I'm going in completely blind, just like I did in my previous review. I had a lot of fun with that. I got some good feedback that people liked. That sort of off-the-cuff tasting. So I'm going to give you my honest, off-the-cuff reactions, sight, smell, taste, can't forget taste, and my general thoughts on it all. And again, even though these samples were provided to me by the distiller, all thoughts and opinions are 100% my own. I expect to like them because a couple of things I've had from St. George before have been excellent and they sound really cool. But again, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I'm going to be honest about what I think. I'm just excited to dig in here. So before we get started with the tasting, I've got some cat fur on my whiskey. You probably can't see it on the camera, but it was deposited probably when Pumpkin came by. Let's do a quick rundown on what exactly I'm going to be tasting. First up, I probably can't see the label, is St. George Breaking and Entering American Whiskey. This is the second time St. George Spirits has released a whiskey under the Breaking and Entering umbrella. The first one was a blend of bourbons sourced from, I think, a few different distilleries. I'd never had the opportunity to try that whiskey, so I can't speak to it. Sounds cool. I always like when distillers are doing interesting things with sourced whiskey. Instead of, just packaging and pretending it was their own. St. George is forthright about saying when they source things versus when they've distilled stuff on their own. Again, breaking and entering, one of the few things I think where they are actually sourcing some of their distillate. Again, that's the old breaking and entering. Not here to talk about that one. This new release is a blend of sourced bourbons and ryes blended with some of their own signature house distilled single malt whiskey. Their single malt, by the way, is one of the things that, at least in my neck of the woods, St. George is best known for. They're doing really interesting Scotch style whiskeys. And they're also doing, by the way, really interesting absinthe and an awesome gin. If you get the opportunity to try St. George Terroir gin, it's really exceptional. Makes a great gin and tonic. It's great with a slice of cucumber. It's great just sipping neat, honestly. If you're like me and someone who's happy to sip gin, it's a very sippable gin, but it makes a killer G&T on a hot summer day. Man, I'm getting thirsty now. Again, not what I'm here to talk about today. Boy, I'm easily distracted sometimes. But this particular whiskey, this Baller, that's not Baller. Baller's the next one. I'm getting ahead of myself. It probably is a Baller whiskey, but that's not what it's called. Breaking and Entering American Whiskey, again, is a blend of sourced bourbon and rye and St. George's own single malt distillate. So it's got an interesting blending of bourbon and rye with that malt. So you're going to get rye, corn, barley, and wheat all kind of blending together, doing their thing. And I expect it to be interesting. I don't really know what to expect from it, other than it's going to be interesting, and I bet I'm going to like it. So I'm going to pour this in the glass and let it breathe a little while I tell you about our next whiskey. The next one I got here, the one I accidentally let the name slip, St. George Baller. This is a single malt whiskey in the style of a Japanese single malt. So their master distiller says essentially this is a California take, St. George being based in California, a California take on a Japanese spin on Scotch whiskey. So a real globe-trotting flavor profile here. It's one I'm really intrigued by. Japanese whiskey can be really exceptional, for as you probably know. It's also kind of unobtainium around here now. So it's interesting to try what an American distiller is doing that's going to kind of give that Scotch by way of Japan kind of profile. Probably much lighter bodied than a bourbon, possibly more floral tasting. This in particular is going to be interesting in that it's distilled in their pot stills that they use for eau de vie, or essentially brandy, and then aged in a combination of bourbon and French oak wine casks, and then finished in casks that held their house distilled umeshu, which is a Japanese style plum, essentially plum brandy. Not something I'm super familiar with. I've tried a couple, but it's pretty interesting. This umeshu, by the way, again, distilled by St. George in California, with plums grown in California. So this should be really unique and interesting as well. I'm going to let this one sit and breathe over here as well while I go back and dive into breaking and entering. That is diving into trying the St. George Breaking and Entering whiskey. I'm not advocating any actual crime around here. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely, that nose tells me this is very rye heavy, actually. More so than I'd expected. I don't know why I was expecting it to be softer, but there's a lot of spice on the nose. A lot of clove, nutmeg. There's some dill in there. I don't know if St. George has disclosed where they sourced their component spirits from for the sourced bourbon and rye. But actually, there's a lot of dill going on. But especially with that dill note, I would not be surprised if the rye is MGP rye. They're 95% rye spirit that has made its way around the world. and I don't say that as a disparaging comment. I happen to really love MGP rye. If you've followed my old school whiskey blog back over the last several years, you know I wax poetic about MGP rye. And this, I could be completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure that kind of dill and baking spice combo, that's pretty on the nose for MGP. And I'll be honest, the more I sniff at it, the more I'm smelling that dill. The less I'm smelling other stuff. I'm not getting a lot of, vanilla-y, bourbon-y kind of notes. It's really the rye coming through on the nose there. All right, let's give it a taste. Oh, that is rich. That is... sweeter than I'd expect from the nose. Definitely a lot more of the bourbon sweetness and vanilla comes through. Definitely taste the single malt in there. It's got that sort of rich cereal character that you don't tend to get from a bourbon or a rye. Definitely that barley sweetness in there in the background. A little appley. Like a little Granny Smith apple, maybe. Some vanilla. Not much oak presence, at least not oak flavors that sort of dominate anything. It's really mellow, easy to sip on. This is one that I think if someone wanted to drop an ice cube or two in there, they certainly could. Not typically my style with a bourbon or a rye. I tend to sip neat, but this one I think probably do well if you're someone who likes your whiskey chilled. I think you'd enjoy it that way. If you're like me and tend to like sipping it neat, I'm enjoying this way too. It's got a nice, balanced flavor profile. There's a little of that sweetness, a little bit of that apple, that kind of creamy cereal flavor, a little bit of vanilla lurking through there, a little bit of, clove and nutmeg and those, rye baking spices. But it's not overpowering. It's not like a stringent, in-your-face rye. Again, I think it's that single malt that really tempers it. I'm not going to say smooth. I'm not a fan of the word smooth to describe whiskey. Smooth to me implies that, hey, it doesn't really taste like much, and you can just kind of guzzle it back and not notice. So I won't say it's smooth. I will say, like I said, it's mellow. Nothing really attacks your palate. There's no one dominant note of like, bam, it's this flavor in my face. It's just a really nice mingling of these different kind of whiskey voices, I guess. Is a weird analogy, but hey, like I said, I don't script this stuff. That's just kind of what hits me in the moment. It's like a well-balanced choir of whiskeys. That rye, bourbon, single malt, all kind of mingling together. Yeah, that's I'm getting a little more vanilla now. Definitely apple. I said Granny Smith. I'm not really getting a Granny Smith vibe from it. I'm going to retract that and say it's more like maybe like a Fuji or something. It's definitely more like apple sweetness rather than tartness. There's no like sourness or astringency to this. It's just a really pleasant sipper. I don't know that I'd make in like old fashioned with it. Maybe I would, but I don't know. It'd be my go-to for like that. I tend to like slightly more aggressive whiskeys in an old fashioned. That said, if you tend to want your old fashions to be a little more subdued, it would work in that. I do think it could make a really good Manhattan. I think it could play really nicely with some of the like herbaceous flavors and good vermouth. Yeah, I might have to try that. Actually, the more I think about that, I think this would make a really good Manhattan. I probably want to go with not a super sweet vermouth, because this whiskey is a little on the sweeter side already, but maybe something with a little more astringency or bitterness to it. Maybe even like a perfect Manhattan, 50-50 sweet and dry vermouth with the whiskey in there. That would be tasty. Ooh, maybe in a Boulevardier, actually, if I want to add a little bitterness there. That made me think this and some, again, good sweet vermouth, some Campari. Adding a little of that bitterness I don't think would overpower the flavors as long as I balanced it out. I think that little bit of bitterness might complement the kind of mellow sweetness of this whiskey really nicely. I think it might just kind of all round together into a really sippable, maybe dangerously sippable drink. I'm going to probably have to try that tomorrow. Yeah, this would make a really good Boulevardier. I'm going to try it. If I had Campari right now, I might have to try it tonight. Unfortunately, Campari is pretty darn hard to find in my neck of the woods right now. There's, shortages, like with everything everywhere. But hopefully get it back in stock soon, and maybe I can even find it tomorrow and go make a Boulevardier with this. All right, I'm gonna add a drop of water and see what the heck happens. I'll say it pretty instantly mutes some of the dill notes. I get a little more vanilla on the nose. Some like white pepper, something a little earthy and spicy that's not, baking spices. Yeah, definitely a little more vanilla. I'd leave the water out of this one. Honestly, I think it doesn't need it. If I'm going to be sipping it neat, I don't know. I think that water takes away some of the rich, like, combined flavors that I liked before. So I might retract what I said about, hey, if you might like it with a couple ice cubes in it. Now, with the caveat, hey, drink your whiskey how you like your whiskey. If you want some ice in it, put some ice in it. But I do think you're going to lose more than I thought you might. It might become a little more one note. You might really like that note. So if you want to give it a shot, you do you. But I think, that drop of water really does dilute some of the richer flavors. The cereal notes get a little subdued. The spice kind of fades into the background. Kind of just, I get a lot of like apple pie, not like spiced apple pie, but just like stewed apple, which is perfectly pleasant. But it loses some of the character that it had, right out of the bottle. And that's, again, the only way to learn that is to try it. So I think when I go back for more of this, or when I pick up a bottle, because honestly, at about $35 a bottle, it's really reasonable for something that's this interesting. Puts it in the sort of ballpark price-wise of a lot of decent daily drinkers for bourbon and rye, but it's something really different from your typical bourbon and rye. So I think having a bottle of this on the shelf is certainly fun if you want to try some cocktails with it and see how this kind of unique spirit works in there. If you want to sip something that's a little different, but not, going to be like a heavy-duty, have to focus all your attention on it kind of head-scratcher, I think it's a great one. It's also, if you got a friend who's getting into whiskey, you think they might want to broaden their horizons, you're looking to get them a gift, I think it's one they'd really appreciate. It's something totally different, something unique to try. Give it a shot. I think this is a pretty cool, unique blend. Okay, moving on to our next one here. The St. George Baller, our Japanese whiskey by way of California. Huh. I will be honest, I have never gotten a nose like this off a whiskey. Again, because I don't script this and I haven't tried this before, I gotta take a second to try to figure out exactly what the heck I'm getting here. It's really floral. Like, really floral. It's like rosewater and maybe a little lavender. Cherry blossom? Am I being a little biased by the whole Japanese-inspired thing? Maybe. I don't know. But it's kind of got that sweet, sort of fruity flower aroma. Definitely get some fruit in there, too. There's definitely fruit I would not be able to place if I didn't know that it was finished in umeshu barrels and, was going to have that plum kind of influence. So I'm pretty sure that's plum I'm smelling. There's definitely a rich sweetness to this. Flowers, plum, maybe a little ginger? A little white tea, maybe? Probably sounds a little pretentious, but yeah, it's tea, but it's not that sort of astringent note you might get off of green tea. It's definitely not black tea. Actually, maybe it's jasmine. Maybe I'm getting like a white tea and a little bit of jasmine in there. That sort of floral, fragrant, earthy sweetness. It's really not something I expect off a whiskey. I'm being totally honest. I've never had a Japanese whiskey even that had that sort of nose to it, much less a Scotch whiskey, certainly not an American whiskey. So St. George definitely is doing something cool and quirky and different with this, which is awesome. But so it smells great. It smells like no other whiskey I've ever tried. But let's taste it. See what we got in the glass here. Ooh. Whoa, that's a long finish. Also, does not taste at all like it smells. That is wild. Wow. I was not prepared for this one. I will be completely honest there. I'm gonna try that again and see. I don't know what to say about that yet. I know, as you're listening to this and watching my reaction, this is not helping. You're like, well, Josh, how do I decide if I want to buy a bottle of this? Your weird facial expressions and humming is not really helpful. Okay, I'll try to give you more descriptive tasting notes. There's an undercurrent of sweetness to it. That kind of plum and jasmine flavor sort of blended with a little honey. It's there, and it lingers. It really lingers. I mean, that is a really long finish. I'm still tasting that first sip. That floral sweetness is going to linger with you, but it's not the dominant note. It's actually a surprisingly astringent whiskey. Which I would not have guessed from the sweet floral aroma. There's like a bracing, like biting into like a grapefruit rind, sort of tart, acidic bitterness that hits you right up front. I don't think that's for everyone. I'll be honest. I think there's people who will taste that immediately and say, no, thank you. I, however, happen to really like it. Yeah, these two whiskeys could not be more different. This is, I think, an awesome, like, someone who's relatively new to whiskey, or, more experienced, but someone who's relatively new to whiskey would love this and say, wow, this is cool and different. This is the expert level stuff. This is the sitting back in your leather armchair, jaded whiskey drinker who feels like they've tried everything. And, you got to kind of grab them by the lapels and shake them out of their, blasé attitude about spirits. Give them something like this, and it's gonna wake them up and say, oh, okay, there are flavors I have not tried in whiskey yet. I'd liken it to if you're a Scotch drinker who has really only ever had Speyside malts, and you love Speyside malts, that sort of richer, sweeter flavors, and you've never had an Islay whiskey, and then you have Ardbeg 10 or something, or a Lafroig quarter cask, something that's really aggressive and in your face, and you say, whoa, what, this is new and different and intense. This is, I would say, this whiskey, it's not compare it flavor-wise to an Islay whiskey at all, but in terms of how it's different than a typical, American single malt. This is as different from a typical American single malt as an Islay single malt is from a, sweeter, sherried, single malt Scotch. It's intense, it's bracing, it's got that sort of bite to it. But I should give you some more specific tasting notes. I did promise that. Yeah, it's got a bit of a, again, that biting into a grapefruit rind taste up front. They're peppery, like black pepper hitting the middle of your palate. That sort of nutty flavor, almost like a kind of bitter almond sort of taste, like a little amaretto-y, maybe. Some ginger, but like spicy hot ginger, not like candied ginger. So you got these sort of bitter, spicy, it's a little salty. All those flavors all hit you just one after another. It's like being run over by trucks full of intense flavors. And then there's this current of like honey jasmine sweetness that just like picks you back up and says, okay, you're still with us. It's okay. Here, have some more. And it kind of resets your palate, and that sweetness is what lingers. It makes it easy to go back for another sip. Yeah, this is one I foresee coming back to and continuing to pick out new flavors from. This is like a scavenger hunt of unique whiskey flavors. There's a lot to unpack, a lot to try. This is definitely one I would recommend if you're a seasoned whiskey geek and want to try something new. Go for this. Give Baller a shot. It's not like any other American single malt I've tried. Certainly not like any Scotch or Japanese whiskey I've tried. It's its own thing. It's maybe part of that is that finishing in the umeshu casks. Part of it might be what St. George has done with their initial distillate. Might be the cask that was aged in prior to finishing. Probably all of the above, but boy, it's unique. It's really cool. Retails for about $70 a bottle. So, not cheap. Maybe one to try at a bar if you're on the fence, if you think it's for you. But it's also not extravagant compared to some of the other American single malts out there. Certainly not compared to a lot of Scotch and certainly Japanese whiskeys out there. But it's one, if you're on the fence, definitely go order a dram of it at a bar and try it if you can find it by you, or find a friend who has it and have them pour you a little. Or if you're really intrigued and want to pull the trigger and give it a shot, buy a bottle. You will at least find it interesting. I can guarantee you that. And maybe you're like me and you're really going to love it. I'm looking forward to continuing to dig into this. I am going to try a couple more things. I'm going to go add that drop of water in there. See what that does. And I got one more surprise in store. Okay, so with a little bit of water, the sweetness is a little dialed back on the nose, and now I smell a little of the bitterness that it sort of hid on the initial approach before. Oh, that's interesting. Whereas a little water on the nose brought out more of the bitterness and muted some of the sweetness. When it comes to the palate, it mutes the bitterness and brings out more sweetness. It's not overpoweringly sweet, but definitely get more of that honey, jasmine, white tea, a little rose petal maybe. And that sort of bitter grapefruit fades back a little. The almonds disappeared on me. Ginger's still there a little. Still got that white pepper. Grapefruit's more like, less like the rind and more like sweet, like broiled grapefruit. I don't know if, maybe that was just my family, but growing up a great treat was putting grapefruit under the broiler until it starts crisping up on the top and then drizzling honey on it. This is like that sort of caramelized, like bittersweet fruit with a little kiss of honey. A little salty too, a little more salty than it was before. I'd say it's a little less confusing with that drop of water. It helps sort of help me make sense of some of the flavors, or maybe it's just I've been sipping it for a while now and I'm getting more adjusted to them, but a few drops of water, I think, balances it out, makes it a little more approachable while no less interesting. So try it neat first, but you might find a few drops of water might make this one a little more approachable for you. I'll have to try it again both ways. Right now I'm inclined to say those couple of drops of water do increase my enjoyment of something I already am finding I liked. So I'd say again, probably not the whiskey for a newbie, unless you're like me and you dive headfirst into crazy bold flavors right as you're getting into the hobby, and your first whiskey is a Lefroy quarter cask or something. Maybe if you're like that, this would be a great intro whiskey. But otherwise, maybe once you've got a few others under your belt, give it a try, and you could be pleasantly confused like I am right now. Now, I said I had one more thing in store, and that is this whiskey. They call it Baller because their master distiller said that they were inspired by the Japanese whiskey highball, which essentially is a classically Japanese, very simple cocktail that's a blending of usually malt whiskey and soda water. Different variations, and a highball in general could be any sort of sparkling beverage blended with spirit, but the classic Japanese highball was some sort of malt whiskey and soda. So I'm not going to make a whole one, but I'm going to do a very, very crude whiskey highball with St. George Baller. Could do a little mini one because I've already got some whiskey out here and I don't want to neglect these two. I just got this idea right before I went to record the video, so I don't have anything like a jigger or a measuring cup or anything with me. So we're gonna improvise, and I'm gonna eyeball my baller, the whiskey eyeballer, as it were. Let's see. We'll go light. A little splash here. And a little soda water. My soda stream needs a new canister, so resorting to cans. Go roughly 50-50. That's how I tend to like my highballs. Use my little water spoon. Sure, why not? let's see. A improvised whiskey highball with St. George Spirits Baller single malt whiskey. Yeah, still get all that jasmine on the nose, that sort of white tea, plenty of sweetness. Oh, that is killer. That is exceptional. Yeah, that soda water blended in here. Now, sort of the bitterness is dialed way back by some of the effervescence in there. That sweet floral honeyed aroma is now there on the palate, and there's this tiny bit of salty bitterness lingering, but mostly it's just easy drinking, refreshing, still complex. So there's still a lot going on, but that's a great summer cocktail. I'd probably garnish it with like a slice of cucumber. I think would be really good in there. Actually would play with those flavors really nicely. I definitely recommend giving, if you have your hands on a bottle of St. George Baller, go make a highball with it. I'd stick with soda water, I think. Just plain unflavored soda water. I sometimes like a whiskey and tonic. I don't think this would be a great candidate for that. Doesn't need the extra bitterness. I think just adding some bubbles brings out that sweetness, and this would be a great sort of summer day poolside long drink, or sitting out on the porch on a hot day. Great after mowing the lawn. Anytime you're hot and sweaty, you need to cool off and refresh yourself. This would be pretty killer. Yeah. So again, just to recap, we had St. George Baller, Japanese style American single malt whiskey, finished in umeshu plum wine casks. And before that, we had the St. George Spirits Breaking and Entering, their blend of bourbon and rye with their own house single malt whiskey. Also excellent. I'd say, again, more approachable for a whiskey beginner, more sort of the advanced, if we're going to be pretentious about it, whiskey. Both are excellent. I think both are really worth giving a shot wherever you are with your whiskey journey. I'm going to enjoy both of these. I'm looking forward to picking up bottles of them to add to my shelf. But with that, I've probably yammered on long enough. I'm going to go turn off the camera and hang with my cat and drink some whiskey. So until next time, which should not be nearly as long, hope you all have a great night, and cheers.